Job. I think the first thing I want to talk about Job is why would we talk about Job now at the beginning of the year when Job doesn't come in the Bible for, it's nearly at the end of it, it's at least halfway through the Old Testament. If not, if you do the math, it's actually over halfway through your Bible. If you open your Bible, you'll open to Psalms, and Job comes after Psalms. No, Job comes before Psalms. I know my Bible. Job, then Psalms. Job comes just before Psalms. So it's right at halfway through the Bible. Why are we talking about Job tonight then? Because chronologically, Job comes after Genesis 11. That's why. Where Job fits timing-wise. Job is not listed in the Old Testament canon. Job is not placed chronologically. Job is placed with the kind of literature that the Jewish rabbis considered him to be. The Jewish rabbis considered Job to be a wisdom book with Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. It was that kind of literature because of some of the stuff that's there, some of the wisdom that's there, that's talked about as you go through some of the discussions with Job and his supposed friends.
Did Jews consider him a historically real person?
Absolutely. They consider him to be a historically real person, but the kind of literature it is places it not as they don't consider it to be a historical narrative that's going to move the flow of redemption. This is a story that's going to provide wisdom, and so they put it with the wisdom books. And when the canon was completed, Job stayed there. But Job really falls, and when I taught way back, like 5 years ago now, 7 years ago now, 2011, when I taught, 7 years, that's crazy. And when I taught through Genesis, we did stop at Genesis chapter 11, and we did Job, right where I think Job falls. Why? Well, first reason why. Job, the name itself, is a very early name in history. The name Job occurs very, very early. That places him at early time. In fact, Job, the name Job is found in Egyptian writings. Not this Job necessarily, but the name Job is found in Egyptian writings in about 2000 BC. So it's a very old name. The Chaldeans, who are referred to in the book of Job, Chaldeans are referred to as a nomadic people. By the time Abraham's on the scene, we know the Chaldeans are no longer nomadic. The Chaldeans are now city dwellers. Where did Abraham come from? Ur of the Chaldees, right? The Chaldeans have a place now. They're no longer wondering about. In Job, they are the ones, some of the marauding people that come and take his stuff, right? So because of what the Chaldeans are doing, they haven't settled yet, and so it makes sense to say, well, why haven't they settled yet? Because they haven't expanded where they're going to be. Remember, everybody's around the Tower of Babel. With Nimrod as the leader, everybody's there. It's after the confusion of languages that people begin to disperse. It took a while for that to happen. So Job, in the book of Job, the Chaldeans are still nomads. By the time we get to Abraham, Genesis 12, they're not nomads anymore. They become city dwellers. So Job must fall in that time period there, at least I think. Job's wealth is listed as being wealthy with livestock, not wealthy with gold. What made him a wealthy man was all the stuff he had as far as livestock goes, not the gold that he had. So that's another indication. His age, Job lived to be about 200 years old. Abraham lived to 175. If you watch the progression, they get younger and younger. They die younger and younger and younger and younger. So Job living at 200 years old, you got to think it's a clear indication that he happens shortly after the flood and before Abraham. The way sacrifice was done. Some have tried to say that Job is a Jew. Job could not have been a Jew. Could not have been a Jew, especially post-law. Why do I say that? Because Job offers sacrifice for his kids. And the only people who could offer sacrifice in Israel once the law was in place were priests. Job is not a priest. So Job offering sacrifice for his kids would have made him unrighteous and not the righteous man God proclaimed him to be. because God's saying he's a righteous man that spits out evil and does only the right things all the time. If Job was a Jew after the law, he violated the law in offering sacrifice for his kids. He can't do that. That's probably the biggest deal for me, is Job offering sacrifice. We see that pattern. We see Adam offering sacrifice. I think, let me go back. That may be something I read. I think in Josephus, Adam maybe offered sacrifice. But we see dads offering sacrifice for their kids. Abraham does it. So it's done. But the fact is, once we hit the law, that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen anymore. In fact, if you're a Jew and you offer sacrifice, there's a king that did that once. Remember the king that did that once? His name is Saul. And because he did it, God ripped the kingdom away from him. There's another king that did it, tried to act like a priest. His name is Uzziah. And what happened to him? He got leprosy and died leprous and an outcast because of his trying to take the priestly function, the priestly role. So God would never refer to Job as one who spits out evil, one who's righteous and upright if Job was violating the law. He would never refer to him that way. So those are 5 reasons I think Job is an early book and why he falls where he does. I think he falls after Nimrod because he's defined as part of a nation, or the Chaldeans are defined as part of a nation. Those don't exist until after Nimrod. So that's why I believe Job falls between Genesis 11 and Genesis 12, sometime in there. That's why I believe it. Some really smart Bible people say he falls other places. I absolutely don't think so. I think he falls between 11 and 12 Genesis. So what does Job show us? Job shows us and gives us information regarding the sovereignty and providence of God. Through Job, we get a clear picture of how God works in the lives of his people. And we get a new understanding of God. Something that even his friends didn't get at the time. His friends, when Job has this happen to him, the common understanding today was, if you have bad things happen to you, it's because you've sinned. And that's the wrestling match. From Job chapter 3 to Job chapter 37, there's a wrestling match that takes place. And the wrestling match is not a riddle. They're not, battle royale. They're not doing that. They're wrestling intellectually. They're wrestling mentally with who God is and how do you define God. And Job is saying, I have not sinned. I have not sinned. And the friends are saying, just admit you've sinned. And then they actually make stuff up. Oh yeah, you're really a harsh man. You don't show equal weight. They start making all this stuff up about him. And he said, no, I don't. That's a lie. He doesn't say that's a lie, but he said, I don't do that. I don't do that. What you're saying, man, I don't do it. I am upright. I am honest. I am right. I haven't done this. God is just mean. That's what he says. God is just, and he has a right to be. If he wants to be mean, God is right to be mean. I don't like it, Job. I wish at this point, I just was never been born. And even there you get an idea of Job understanding eternity. Because he doesn't say, I wish I was dead. Because I think Job recognized, if I'm dead, that means there's still an eternal state. I could be in hell. But he says, I wish I'd never been born. Because if you've never been born, then you never had a soul, and you don't have the eternal. So even there you see some interesting insight that Job has early on in history. So you see the sovereignty and providence of God and how he orchestrated events, and how and you also see the relationship of Satan to God's people. Because it's interesting that, we get this idea that Satan can come attack us, but he can't do anything unless God gives him permission first. Because I find it really interesting that as you read the book of Job, most of us come at it with, Satan goes and Satan brings Job up and says, look at Job, I can make him. But it's not Satan that brings Job up, it's God that does. It's God that does. Satan just walked around and God says, where you been? And Satan says, I've been to and fro on the earth, wreaking whatever havoc you let me wreak, basically. And God says, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan says, I've considered him, but you won't let me touch him, so what's the point? Let me touch him, I'll curse you to your face. He goes, okay, touch him. Take everything he's got. Take everything he's got. Satan does exactly that, takes everything he's got. He does it through many ways, with fire and wind and all these kinds of things. It's interesting as you read that, you read Satan doing it, and you also read God caused a great wind to come up. Satan did it, and God caused you. Yeah, it's interesting that all that fits together. It really fits well with James when God says about when you're falling into various trials, and then let no one say he's 10 times tempted of God. It really, you'll get there eventually. I'm not going to do that time. That clock is wrong. I keep looking up and thinking I got a lot of time, and I don't. So that we see that, and then I think the biggest lesson for me in the book of Job is we learn not to ask why, but we learn to recognize who. Not to ask why, but recognize who. As you get to the end of Job, Job's had all these questions. He's had all these issues go on. He's had all these discussions with his friends. And when it comes finally to the end, God, some of my favorite, I'm sometimes a little sarcastic anyway, but I love even the sarcasm God uses there, because God says, okay, Mr. Man, you who know everything, you stand there, and now I'm going to ask you some questions, and you answer me. And God doesn't say, here's what I did, and here's why I did it. He says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Can you store up the snows, and can you, he does all this stuff, and basically he says, this is who I am. Who are you, little man? Who are you, little man? And Job gets it. Because Job doesn't say, yeah, okay, I get that, but why'd you do that? He says, well, I spoke things I should never have said. I said things I shouldn't have said. I questioned you the way I should never question you. Basically, I repent in dust and ashes. I'm so sorry I did that. So that's I think a really good lesson to learn from Job. 3 major sections in Job. You have the dilemma in chapters 1 and 2, where you have the discussion with Satan and God, and then you have the destruction really of Job's fortune and Job's family and Job's, I couldn't come up with another F word, fitness, but that doesn't really make sense. His health goes away, and even his hope goes away. Because I know one of the people that can always speak truth to me, that can always lift me up, is my wife. And as Job is sitting there in the ash heap, scraping his sores with the potsherd, his wife comes up and said, curse God and die. Wow, thank you for help, ma'am. Then you have the debates. The debates are interesting to read, and what you'll find, especially if you decide not to skip Job, which I hope you don't. I really hope you don't skip Job. I hope you just stay in there, do it. You'll find that when you get into the debates, it's easy to try to just scream through them and read them, but read what the guys are saying. Read what they're saying. Sometimes you'll laugh at what they're saying, at the point they're making. Sometimes, especially when you get to the fourth friend, Elihu, I think his name is, or is it Eliphaz? I think it's Elihu. The fourth friend, who's not really a friend at all. He's not really a friend at all. He's just a guy who heard about the debate. It's interesting if you watch it. Job has this calamity. His 3 friends come, Elihu, Bildad, and the other guy. They come, and they sit there for a while. They don't say anything, and then finally they start talking. They start debating. Well, apparently it's taking so long that word gets back to the city that this is going on, and so Eliphaz, or no, Elihu comes out. No, it's Eliphaz. Comes out, and he's a young guy. Job and his friends are kind of older guys. They're like probably the Pastor Mike, Pastor Bryan, that age group of people. They're having this debate, and the young guy, like 35-year-old, comes out. You guys don't know anything. You just shut up and let me talk. That's basically it's interesting. You read what he says. You guys should just shut up and let me talk. I got this. I know what I'm doing. And he doesn't know anything at all. Says things that aren't really true about God. And so you have these debates that take place, and they're really interesting. They're really interesting to read, where there's an accusation made against Job. Job defends himself. Another friend accuses him. Job defends himself. Another friend accuses him. Job defends himself. Job defends himself. Then he's accused. There's a cycle of these debates that take place between the 3 and eventually 4 of them. And then finally you have deliverance, where Job is confronted by God himself, told to stand there like a man, answer his question, Mr. Man. And then Job recognizes who God is and who he is, and he responds by repenting. You see Job delivered. You also see Job's friends delivered. At the end of the book, God says to Job's friends, you are wicked counselors. And unless Job prays for you, I'm taking you out. You're going. You're done. apparently Job prays for his friends and forgives them for their harshness to him, prays for them, and they're restored. But then at the end of the book, Job is also restored. Everything he had is given back to him. He even has 10 more kids. So, three was plenty. So he had 10 more kids. So that's Job. Yeah, that's Job. Yeah.
Do you believe, as MacArthur does, that Moses was the author of Job?
That's a good question. The question was, do I believe that Moses is the author of Job? I think a lot of people point to Moses being the author of Job. It fits for me that he is, because he uses the name Yahweh. Some have suggested that Solomon actually wrote Job years later, pointing back to history because of the similarities between it and some of the Proverbs, some of the Job stuff. But I'd rather think that maybe Solomon took his stuff referenced from Job, not the other way around. You know. So I would say, if I was to say definitely who wrote the book of Job, I would say Moses. Michael?
Famous question I have the entire Bible is about the book of Job.
Huh?
The poetry is very deep in Job, especially Job 3.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, like the best poetry in the entire Bible possibly ever read. So do you think that they would have said that on the fly, or do you think that a writer later would actually take their words and write them in an eloquent way?
That's a great question. I think that because Job is as early as Job is, I think the human mind was far greater in capacity than what our minds are today.
I know language got less complex, not more over time generally.
Right, but he's really close to, the origin of that stuff. So I think that may be the words they used. Well, I mean, we can't guarantee it, but I think it's the words they used, and I think they came up with it on the fly. I think that's, you look at the degradation of language in America over the last 50 years, and try to read, okay, it's 200 years, or 300 years ago, but go get a book written by a Puritan. And if you're going to do that, just get Mystery of Providence. Just get that book with John Flavel. Get that book.
And a dictionary.
And you'll need one, and you'll need to take your time. I read over 1,000 words a minute. I read over 1,000 words a minute, and I read with comprehension over 1,000 words a minute. It takes me, the Mystery of Providence is a little book, it takes me about 5 months to read through that book, and I've read it through 7 times now. 7 times now. And it still takes me that long to read through it, because that's the language that it uses. And it's amazing how language continues to degrade. So I think they probably spoke in a way that was that eloquent when they spoke. That's what I think. That's totally speculation. I know it's very poetic. When Moses wrote, did Moses write poetry, by the way? He wrote a psalm. Psalm 90, read it. It's great. Great psalm. So yes, Moses wrote poetry. So if it was Moses, he did write poetry. Because his poetry doesn't exclude Moses from being the author.
So how many years does Job consist of, from start to finish?
Well, we know Job lived to be 200 years. We don't know how old he was when the calamity started. We don't know that. But we do know that he was old enough to have adult kids. Kids who had adults. Kids who had adults? Adults who had kids. But none of his kids had kids. So I would guess that means in the chronology or in the age groups of those kinds of, I would guess Job is 50 or 60 at that point. So I would say Job is 50 or 60 when the book starts. And by the time the book ends, he's already got 10 more kids and stuff like that. So it's probably a 50-year time span. Again, not sure exactly how close to Nimrod and Babel Job is. Not sure how close that is. It may be he's right close to it. Clearly, the Chaldeans are still migrating away from Babel. They're still moving toward where Babylon is. So they're moving away from it. So, or they're migrating still. So, I don't know if that helps or not.
I got a question.
Okay.
Moses wrote the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Yes.
And he may have written Job.
Right.
So my question is that the early Israelites, they somewhat followed the law. They referred to Job, Genesis. Okay. And they just set those books up on the shelf.
Well, I think they set a lot of those books up on the shelf because, like I said, it was when Moses wrote the book of the law, he wrote with instruction to the parents, this book of law will not depart out of your mouth, but you'll meditate on it. You know, that's Joshua, I'm sorry. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord our soul, strength of mind, love your neighbor yourself. And you'll talk about this law when you go in, when you come out, when you sit down, when you lie. He said that. And you'll talk about it with your kids. He gave them opportunities. He gave them places where they could go and actually talk about God. The nation, one generation hadn't done that to the point where they had forgotten God. A nation rose up that did not know God. So I think it was treated like all the other literature that Moses wrote. And that's throughout Israel's history they did that. If you recall, at the end of the kingdoms, as you're getting close to the kingdoms, there's this king named Josiah, who's a good king, who becomes king in Judah, and the temple is in disrepair because it's not been taken care of. The king before him done a terrible job. So Josiah says, let's renovate. Let's rebuild this thing. He calls for an offering. This huge offering is given. People's hearts are cut to the quick. They give an offering. They begin to rebuild the temple. And they open up a place and they find a scroll. And the workmen say, "What is this?" And they finally end up bringing it to Josiah. Josiah says, "What is this?" And he calls for a priest, and the priest says, "It's the law." And then Josiah has the law read publicly, and the people are just, wow, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Israel's history with the law isn't really, really good, and with the writings of Moses aren't really that great. So, good question, though. It's really in the Babylonian captivity that the focus on the law is developed through the synagogue system, through the scribal system. That's really when the law is developed. It had largely been forgotten before that, but it's in the Babylonian captivity that they begin to take it seriously again. And it's in the Babylonian captivity that the Pharisees are born, who elevate the law above the God of the law. So,
My other hardest question in the whole Bible is related to Job and to Genesis and what you just said. So, from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, how was the history preserved? I mean, written form, God revealed it directly to Moses, or oral form?
well, I think
Speculate, because we don't know.
I'm speculating, but I think that Moses gives us a clue that some of that was written down. The reason I think Moses gives us a clue is because he talks about in the first book, in the first few chapters of Genesis, he says the book of the generations of, not the oral tradition of the generations of. So I think,
Or that God told me
or
this.
the God told the generations of. This is the book of. So I think, and when I taught Genesis way back, I did say that I believe Moses used source material to write the Pentateuch. Beyond direct revelation, that doesn't mean it's not revelation. It absolutely is revelation. Absolutely is revelation. Job used source material that's not, Jude used source material that's not canonical. Jude refers to the book of Enoch. Right? Why don't we have the book of Enoch in our Bible if Jude refers to it? Because the book of Enoch is source material Jude used to write his book. And the book of Enoch can't be canonical. We talked about 4,300 tall giants, 4,500 foot tall giants. And that's error. There may have been giants in the land, but they weren't 4,500 feet tall. That puts them 1/3 of the way up Mount of Pikes Peak. Walking. 3 steps are at the top. They weren't that tall. I know, but there's those 6-foot footprints, I've heard all. I had a guy that I was dealing with that thought it was canonical and thought it should be part of our Bible. I was thinking, no. It's almost angel worship, but they show these 6-foot, guy standing by this 6-foot footprint. Well, okay, my foot is a size 12, so it's basically a foot long. I'm 6 foot tall. Take a 6-foot footprint, times that by 12, you got 72 feet. You don't have 4,500. It just doesn't, the math doesn't work. So anyway, see, we got me started. But I think source material can be used, and I think Moses used source material, and I think he refers to it. He gives us a bibliography, because the book of the generations of, the book of the generations of, he does that like 3 or 4 times. So, good question, but I think actually source material was used. That's speculation again, but I think he used source material. And he would have had access to it, because he was raised as Pharaoh's son. So if it was out there, he would have known, he would have appreciated books, so.
And there's a lot of other books that are written like that aren't in the Bible.
Right.
That's what I've heard.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of extra biblical literature. There's other literature that can be dated back to that time period that's not in the Bible. So we know that there was stuff being written down. Absolutely. And I think we get the idea that early man, Adam and his, before the flood, they were primitive people that lived in caves, carried around clubs and hit people. No, that's not how they're described. They're described as city builders, as people who work with iron and people who did with art, and they're described as a very complex society that was lost in the flood. Again, if you're talking, how far have we progressed in the last 100 years? Think of how man with a fully usable mind would have progressed in 900 years. It would have been amazing. I'm not saying they had cars or anything like that. I'm saying they weren't cavemen. They weren't cavemen. So, anyway. All right, I'm done. If you guys are done asking questions. I mean, I'll stay here and answer questions as long as you want to, but I think you're probably ready to get home. So, I appreciate you being patient. I appreciate you listening. I'm very passionate about the Word of God. I love it. And I could talk about it all the time, forever. But some people fall asleep, and I'm sorry about that. Let me pray, and then I think we're going to go. Lord, thank you for your Word. Thank you for graciously revealing yourself to us. I'm so thankful that you didn't just create the world and walk away, but you created the world displaying your glory, and then you showed us who you are and how to please you. And thank you for your Son, who's rescued us from our sin and given us everything we need pertaining to life and godliness through your Word and your Spirit. Pray that you would just ignite a passion in this group to really stay with reading, to learn, and to be excited about what they learn about you. We ask this in your name. Amen. Thank you.